Tonight on Nova. Tsar Nicholas and his family are brutally executed. But did they all die? For years, this woman claimed to be Princess Anastasia. Now the family's mass grave is uncovered, and these bones can solve the mystery. Science takes on the legend of the lost princess. Anastasia, dead or alive?
Funding for Nova is provided by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. And by Raytheon. Through technological innovation and air traffic control systems, Raytheon helps bring people safely together around the world. Raytheon. Expect great things. Major funding for Nova is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
Siberia, 1991. A birch forest just outside the mining town of Yekaterinburg. Soldiers stand by as a long-hidden Soviet secret comes to light. The lost grave of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Murdered by the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution, the bodies of the Tsar and his family have been missing for almost 75 years. The investigators hope to close this historic case, but they're frustrated by an unexpected problem. They can't find two of the bodies, two of the Tsar's children. This startling discovery reopens one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The legend of Anastasia, the youngest daughter of the Tsar. Historians say that she died with her family, but others insist that the young princess somehow escaped the Bolshevik terror. This idea gained support when, in 1922, the woman in this picture claimed to be Anastasia. It was the start of a lifelong struggle for recognition. Is it possible that her story was true?
I personally am convinced that she was genuine. I don't know why the evidence hasn't spoken to more people before. To me, it's plain as day that she has to be genuine.
I don't believe it. Anastasia died that night along with the rest of their family.
Now, after 75 years of controversy, the Tsar's bones offer new evidence, and forensic science and DNA testing may finally solve the mystery of Anastasia. It all began in the last days of the Russian imperial court. As the youngest daughter of the Tsar, Anastasia Romanov lived a life of privilege. Her father, Nicholas II, ruled with complete authority, revered as God's representative on earth. Anastasia had three beautiful sisters, Maria, Tatiana, and Olga. Her baby brother, Alexei, was heir to a dynasty that had acquired a sixth of the world's surface. At the beginning of this century, the children's lives were a real-life fairy tale, a constant round of bright young men, magnificent palaces, and elegant yachts. It was a perfect world, and it couldn't last. The Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, despised the Romanovs and all they stood for. With the Russian Revolution of 1917, the Tsar was stripped of his power and placed under house arrest. In the bloody civil war that followed, the Tsar and his family were shuffled from place to place. In 1918, the family was confined to the Apatiev house in the Siberian mining town of Yekaterinburg. The White Army, loyal to the Romanovs, rallied against the Bolsheviks. Hoping to rescue the imperial family and restore the Tsar to the throne, they stormed Yekaterinburg in July 1918. But it was too late. All that remained in the Apatiev house were the horrifying signs of a massacre. Witnesses were questioned. An abandoned mine was searched, and the accumulated evidence was photographed and filed. Bullets, buttons, buckles, false teeth, a single severed finger, and a few fragments of the imperial jewels. The conclusion: the Bolsheviks had murdered the Tsar, his wife Alexandra, their physician Dr. Botkin, 3 servants, and all 5 Romanov children. But the bodies had vanished. And for 70 years, what really happened to the Tsar's family remained a well-kept Soviet state secret. Russian author Edvard Radzinski has spent years investigating the murder.
You see, I had consciousness of Soviet people, the same people. We know about this execution only from line of our textbook. The Romanovs were executed by people in Ipatievsky house in basement. That's all. But when I began to read in detail how revolutionary people killed innocent girls, it was really terrible sense.
Radzinski found a key document in the case, the Yurovsky Note. Here was the story of the Romanovs' last hours, written by the Soviet commandant who organized the execution, Yakov Yurovsky.
Everyone was asleep. We woke Botkin, and he woke the others. We explained, because of the unrest in the town, the family must be moved to the ground floor. The Romanovs suspected nothing. Nicholas carried Alexei in his arms. The others carried cushions and other small items. When they came in, the commandant told the Romanovs that the Ural Executive Committee had ordered that they be shot.
Nicholas was killed immediately, but afterwards the very strange story began. The bullets bounced off Grand Duchess and returned to the assassins. The bullets flew through the room. The assassins, they were former workers, peasants. They had really religious sense, and they understood that it's true, the God protected the Grand Duchess, because they continue to shoot and bullets continue to return them. They did not know that the Tsarina hid their jewels in the corsets of Grand Duchess, and these jewels protected them. They decided that it's God, and they really became crazy.
The execution took 20 minutes to complete. Yurovsky reported that the death squad had to resort to bayonets to kill the children. But Radzinski is not convinced that this would have finished them off.
Yurovsky wrote, we check their pulses. It's lie. How to check it? Check out in this terrible smoke among blood. It was as lakes of blood.
"19 months after the secret murder, a young woman is pulled from a canal in Berlin, a failed suicide. She refuses to answer any questions and is taken to a public mental hospital. The staff calls her Miss Unknown, and because of her accent, assumes she is a Russian refugee. Nearly 2 years after being admitted, the woman reveals what she says is her true identity: Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of the Tsar. She tells a fantastic story of escape, dramatized in this Hollywood film. Remembering nothing of the shootings, she claims to have been rescued by one of her captors. The soldier named Tchaikovsky smuggled her through hundreds of miles of dangerous territory and over the border into Romania. But her rescuer was soon killed, and Anastasia fled to Berlin in search of a royal relative. Failing to find her family, she threw herself into the canal. Known to the world as Anna Anderson, the woman became an international celebrity, but she was always reluctant to speak of the murders.
Please don't speak about his blood. Really not. Please not.
Because of his sailor, I'm thinking, you know. How he...
Please not. It's dreadful. It comes a frightful mess out.
Anna Anderson's tragic story attracted many supporters over the course of her life. One of them was Peter Kurth, who became fascinated as a teenager. The author of several biographies, Kurth first met Anna Anderson in 1971. At that time, she was living in Virginia, married to a retired history professor named Jack Manahan.
This house is so completely changed from when Anastasia was living here. You literally could not see the house from the street. She had great big bags full of things and tree stumps and bushes and brambles, and she had something like 80 cats on this property. When I finally got down, quaking in my boots at the prospect of meeting this great 20th century legend, she refused to come out of her room. Jack greeted me out here. Finally, after we'd been out here 2 or 3 hours, standing here, he went back into the house, Jack did, banged on the door again and said, "Now, Anastasia, enough is enough. We're going to sit in the car, and I'm going to honk the horn 4 times. And on the 4th honk, you are coming out." "I'm not," she said. But we did. We sat there, he honked the horn, and he turned to me and said, "She'll be right out now." And she was, just as he'd predicted. And I jumped out of the car to greet her and called her Your Imperial Highness, and she brushed me away and said, "Don't shake my hand." Jumped in the front seat of the car and sat there with a ferocious scowl on her face for about 5 minutes. And then just as suddenly, as we drove off into town, she relaxed. She became absolutely friendly, charming, easygoing, helpful. That was the moment when my strong interest in the subject made a move into a complete rapture. Once I had entered this very strange kingdom on University Circle in Charlottesville, I was sunk. I was a goner. There was no way out. There was no way back after that.
How shall I tell you who I am? In which way? Can you tell me that? Can you really prove to me who you are?
17 at the time of their first meeting, Peter Kurth set out to investigate Anna Anderson's claims. From the start, visitors were struck by Anna Anderson's physical similarity to Anastasia. She was the right height, had the same hair and eyes, and more unusual traits. a damaged finger on the left hand, a distinctive bunion on the toe, a cauterized mole on the shoulder. And Anna Anderson was covered with scars, including a star-shaped mark on the foot, the pattern of a Bolshevik bayonet. Dr. Eugene Botkin, the Tsar's personal physician, was murdered along with the royal family in Siberia. His son, Gleb Botkin, was a playmate of the young Anastasia and was with her during the family's imprisonment.
My father, Gleb Botkin, met Anastasia after she reappeared in Europe for the first time at Castle Sion, which was the home of the Duke of Leuchtenberg. He had planned to meet with her and to show a series of pictures that they had worked on together. As it happened, he saw her pass by him in the hallway, and the minute he saw her, he knew it was Anastasia, just the way she walked, the way she looked. It had been less than 10 years since they had seen one another last, and that's a relatively short time. And he just recognized her. He knew she was she. And subsequently, they did go through the pictures, and whenever they would come to one of the pictures done in Siberia, she'd get very upset.
Another early visitor was Pierre Giard. Anastasia's former tutor, Giard met Anna Anderson at the request of the Romanov family. After several visits and some hesitation, the tutor declared her a fraud. In his book, The False Anastasia, Giard wrote that Anna Anderson did not even remotely resemble the real Grand Duchess. Anastasia's uncle Ernst, the German Grand Duke of Hesse, became another active opponent to Anna Anderson. He secretly hired a detective to investigate her claims. The detective produced this photograph, said to be a Polish woman named Franciszka Szankowska. Szankowska had disappeared from her rooming house in Berlin just before Anna Anderson was pulled from the canal. Her scars, said the detective, were the result not of the firing squad, but of an explosion in the hand grenade factory where she worked. In 1928, 12 of Anastasia's relatives issued a statement denouncing Anna Anderson. Incensed, Gleb Botkin wrote to the Tsar's sister, "It is easier to understand a crime committed by a gang of crazed and drunken savages than the calm, systematic, endless persecution of one of your own family."
My family have always believed that her claims were bogus. They believed that they were doing the correct thing for the family, not for themselves, but for the family and for the memory of the family.
Not all the Romanovs rejected Anna Anderson. Gleb Botkin was able to enlist the help of Anastasia's cousin, Princess Xenia, who had fled Russia for the United States. In Vermont, Peter Kurth tracked down Xenia's daughter, Nancy Weinkoop. She was a 6-year-old girl when her mother invited Anna Anderson for a visit.
Well, from what I can gather, she really wanted to see for herself, and I think originally she wanted to disprove it. But the more she went into it, because there was such a controversy, she knew there was a controversy. So what side was she going to go in on? The only way she could find out was to bring her over. And so she sent this old Scottish nanny of mine over and got her, brought her back. For 6 months, she tried to trip her up, and she never could trip her up. And she always used to say she was just herself. She wasn't trying to be somebody else. I think if you are trying to be somebody else, you'll slip up here or there, or you sort of give an attitude or a pose of something. She never struck my mother as being anybody but just herself.
It was during this first trip to America that the woman from the canal began to call herself Anna Anderson in an attempt to avoid the press. But no matter the name, there was no stopping the international guessing game. Was she, or wasn't she?
I got the feeling when I was with her that there was a family resemblance in not so much physical, but the way she behaved towards me. There was this great feeling of love and affection. And I have felt it with a lot of my European aunts. And of course, that's the thing. How can you stand up in court and say, she affects me the same way as Aunt so-and-so? They'll look at you as though you're crazy.
But court was where Anna Anderson's struggle for recognition would play out. The Romanov family filed a motion to have all the Tsar's children officially declared dead, thereby clearing inheritance rights. Anna Anderson's lawyers countersued, claiming that she, Anastasia, was alive. The trial was a media circus, the witnesses going direct from court to German newsreel appearances. Felix Dassel, a former captain in the Russian Dragoons, was wounded during the First World War. Recuperating in a private hospital near the Tsar's palace, Dassel and the other patients were visited often by the Tsar's daughters, Maria and Anastasia. 10 years after the war, Captain Dassel met Anna Anderson and showed her an old photograph of a fellow patient. "It's the man with the pockets," she declared. Dassel said that Anastasia herself had given the man that nickname, and that no impostor could ever have known such a small detail. The attorney opposing Anna Anderson, Dr. Gunther von Berenberg-Gossler, is not impressed by such anecdotes.
Sie hat eine Hochstaplerrolle gespielt.
She was a confidence trickster of great refinement. A famous example of this is the so-called Darling letter.
In a letter to Anastasia's aunt, Anna Anderson, who spoke no English at the time, put an apostrophe in the middle of the word darling. Berenberg-Gossler believes that she copied the word from this published letter written by the Tsarina Alexandra. But Anna Anderson mistakenly thought that a comma from the line above was part of the word darling.
If that's not tricky, I don't know what is.
Berenberg-Gossler pressed the case that Anna Anderson really was Franziska Schanskovska, the missing factory worker that the German detective had uncovered.
If that was a Polish factory worker, I am the Pope. There were many, many aspects of her personality and her character and her being that were utterly distinctive. There was nothing imaginary about this immense dignity that she had, or which it was not apparent at first sight. It was something you had to be around her long enough, and you would see it revealed. You would see these moments of transformation of her body, her face, her voice, her personality. This is not the invention of her partisans. This is real.
I can only say she had a special talent for learning. It reminds me of Pygmalion. If you look at the history of courtesans in the Baroque era, you find mistresses of princes who came from the lowest origins, and they later became very great ladies, often even achieving great things in politics.
Was this woman, taken by so many for royalty, really a Polish peasant? To photo comparison expert Jeff Oxley, it certainly looks that way.
We assume, to begin with, that they are the same person. We start off with that assumption. And we set up 2 points. In this case, the best 2 points is the interocular distance. That is the distance between the centre of the eyes. We painted in red so that you can tell the difference. And we painted the other one of Francesca in green. Now, with this system, if those 2 points are correlated and it is the same person, other points on the face should be correlated. And again, you'll notice as we fade in of one and out of the other. For example, let's take this point here, fade into the red, you can see it coincides exactly with the point when we fade into the green. So those are consistent and that's consistent. Now let's have a look at the mouth. If you come into the mouth, the coincidence in terms of its size and its position is almost exact.
It looks very great on computers, but I do not believe it at all. It will take a lot more than a computer to convince me that this woman was born, made hand grenades in the First World War in a factory. She didn't know that you were supposed to get change back from your money when you left it on the counter if you bought something. They had to teach her things like this because her contact with the real world had been so minimal as a child. I know all these aspects of her are true. I know that the people who knew her, even many who didn't believe her, knew that she was somebody very distinct. They knew she was quelqu'un, that she was really somebody.
The German court sought more definitive proof. Without Anastasia's fingerprints or dental records, there could be no quick verdict. The case dragged on for decades, examining every possible bit of evidence. In 1960, even Anna Anderson's ears were compared to photographs of Anastasia's. In 1993, forensic expert Peter Venices repeated the ear test with more advanced technology.
We are basing this on the assumption, which has been validated over the years, that there are no two ears the same, even on identical twins. And once the person has passed the age of 4 months, then the design contours of the ear, its attachment to the face remain the same. They don't change, even into advanced elderly age.
Photographs of Grand Duchess Anastasia are enlarged to focus on the ears. These are then compared to the ears of Anna Anderson, seen here, along with 5 other women. Because there's an element of human judgment involved, 6 different technicians score the ears separately, without knowing the subject's identity.
Okay, can you give me a wipe and concentrate?
There is one particular set of photographs which has scored better than the others.
This is the right ear that matched the best, and Anastasia's. The best match, and Anastasia's. Venices scores the ears on a scale from 1 to 5. The angle of view, or orientation, sometimes complicates the scoring.
I could only give it a 5 if the orientation was good and it was a perfect match. But in view of the fact that the orientation did vary, I would therefore give it a score of about 4 as being a very good match.
On the left ear, the match was even better.
Slightly more turned, isn't it?
Yeah. If one takes the inner part of that ear into consideration only, I would have said a 5 for that, most definitely a 5 for that part of the ear. And I don't think that this pattern on the inner aspect of the ear would have occurred purely by chance. I think this is significant.
The match was amazingly close.
This is the set that you can see from this set here. This is the lady in question that, in fact, seemed to be the most likely of the other 5 candidates.
The lady in question was Anna Anderson.
All those pluses, how many pluses can you get? I mean, it goes on and on ad infinitum. Unless, of course, you don't believe, and then you don't listen to any of the pluses.
In 1967, the German court ruled that Anna Anderson had failed to prove that she was Anastasia. She had lost her long struggle for recognition. Penniless, she left Europe and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia. She stayed at the home of Jack Manahan, a retired history professor. 6 months after her arrival, Jack and Anna Anderson were married. As Anastasia Manahan, she lived out her increasingly eccentric life surrounded by her beloved cats and dogs. Her days were punctuated by visits from the media. In 1983, local reporters covered the publication of Peter Kurth's book.
She is Anastasia. I feel that a real injustice has been committed in this case.
Ich bitte dich, komm doch, Hans. Komm doch.
She thinks so too.
Not long after this last meeting, Anastasia Manahan was committed to a nursing home deemed mentally unstable and unable to look after herself. In 1984, she died. Her true identity no clearer than it had been the day she was pulled from a canal in 1920. In the 1970s, a group of amateur detectives living in Yekaterinburg started a hunt for the lost grave of the last Tsar. A copy of the secret executioner's report was discovered. A photograph of the man in charge of the burial turned up. He stood atop a set of wooden boards. On the back it was labeled, "Standing on the Tsar's Tomb." The detectives found what they were looking for, and then covered it up. They swore an oath of silence and waited for the end of the communist regime. In 1991, the grave was exhumed again, this time before the cameras of Russian television. For 75 years, the fate of the Tsar and his family had been a matter of conjecture, opinion, and faith. Now, these bones would turn the case over to the world of science. Forensic anthropologist Dr. William Maples.
When the grave was opened, the bodies were stacked one on top of the other in a haphazard fashion, arms and legs akimbo. It was just a typical jumbled mass grave.
Dr. Maples was called in by the Russians to help identify the bones.
Here we have several of the cranial remains from the grave. This skull is that of Alexandra, the Tsaritsa. It shows impressive dental work with crowns that are made of 100% pure platinum. Here we have the two front teeth, beautiful workmanship, clearly not only the best dental care of its time, but the most expensive dental care you could imagine. This skull is Tsar Nicholas. He was missing many of his teeth and had rather severe periodontal disease. If he hadn't have been killed in 1918, he probably would have had to have his teeth removed and dentures made, because his overall dental health was not good at all. One is tempted to wonder if being the Tsar gives you the right not to go to the dentist as much as you should.
The bones also showed graphic evidence of a violent end.
All of the skulls show extensive facial damage, probably from rifle butts. We have some interesting injuries. We have a broken jaw. The lower jaw, the mandible, is broken here on the left side of the body. I believe this is where the gunshot entered her head, and from her lower jaw traversed up through her palate, behind her nasal structures, and through the front part of her brain to emerge from the top of her head right about here. This is the breastbone from this individual, skeleton 9, and it has a stab wound from a large weapon such as a bayonet or something that goes all the way through it, comes out the back surface. This skull received a gunshot wound, a fairly small caliber here, traversed through the brain and exited over here in her right temporal area.
To back up the physical evidence, the Russians sent samples of the bones to London, where Dr. Peter Gill would perform forensic DNA tests.
So what we're going to do is to extract the DNA from all of these sets of bones and to compare that DNA with DNA from other relatives.
Standard DNA testing uses DNA from the chromosomes unique to every individual. But to test the Tsar's bones, comparisons must be made across several generations. So Dr. Gill will use DNA from mitochondria, the cell's energy base. Mitochondrial DNA is passed on intact from mother to child. Because it remains virtually identical over many generations, mitochondrial DNA is an excellent indicator of maternal bloodlines. Like all DNA, mitochondrial DNA is made up of 4 bases: adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, which appear over and over. It is the order of the bases that determines a family's DNA profile. England's Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, is related through the maternal line to Anastasia's mother, Tsarina Alexandra. So his mitochondrial DNA has the same pattern as the Tsarina and her children. He donated a blood sample to Dr. Gill. The mitochondrial DNA was extracted and compared to the DNA from the bones found in Yekaterinburg. The DNA patterns matched exactly.
The estimate we've given is the lowest one which we could imagine. A probability of about 98.5% that this is the Romanov family. These results need to be taken in conjunction with the anthropological evidence, and then other probability estimates may be given. It's like putting together a big jigsaw.
If the bones in the grave were a puzzle, there were 2 important pieces missing. The Russians expected to find 11 bodies in the grave, but there were only 9. Who was missing? All the male skeletons were middle-aged, so Alexei, the 14-year-old heir to the throne, was definitely absent. Among the females, the middle-aged Tsarina and maid were present, along with 3 younger women. One of the Tsar's 4 daughters was unaccounted for. At the time of their deaths, Olga would have been almost 23 years old, Tatiana 21, Maria 19, and Anastasia 17 years, 1 month.
This is probably the skull of Olga, the oldest daughter. Her wisdom teeth showed complete roots, which would be expected in someone about 23 years old at the time of her death. The other 2 daughters that were found did not have complete roots on those particular teeth, so they were clearly younger than this.
Searching for the mysterious Anastasia, Maples looked to the vertebrae, the bones in the back. When we're young, small bony rings lie between each vertebrae. Around age 18, these rings fuse with the larger bones. If Anastasia, age 17, were in the grave, then some of the vertebrae would appear without rings.
None of the vertebrae show any really open rings that aren't more or less united. None of the vertebrae show any just very partially united rings. If she were present, then some vertebrae should show immaturity, marked immaturity, and they don't. None of the bones show any immaturity, as you would see in a 17-year-old girl. So, in my opinion, Anastasia wasn't among the 9 buried in that grave.
What had happened to the 2 youngest children of the Tsar? Maples believes the answer lies in the Yurovsky note, the secret account of the Romanov murder written by the head executioner. According to Yurovsky, the grisly job of disposing of the 11 bodies took almost 3 days.
The site chosen was an abandoned mine, but it turned out that no one knew where the selected mine shaft was. The commandant sent riders to find the place, but no one could.
Several times the truck broke down. Finally, with daylight approaching, they reached their destination. The victims were stripped, their clothing burned, and the naked bodies lowered down the mine shaft. The Bolsheviks threw grenades into the pit, but the explosions failed to seal off the grave. Fearing the bodies would be discovered, the disposal squad returned the next night. They retrieved the corpses and set out for deeper mines several miles away. But again, fate intervened.
At about 4:30 on the morning of July 19th, the vehicle got permanently stuck. Since we were not going to reach the mines, we had to bury them or burn them. By about 7 in the morning, a pit 6 feet deep and 8 feet square was ready. The bodies were put in the hole, and the faces on all the bodies were doused with sulfuric acid so they couldn't be recognized, and to prevent any rotting smell.
But not all the victims were buried, said Yurovsky. 2 of the bodies were destroyed in a bonfire built nearby. Even a burned body will leave some remains. But after 4 years of searching, there are still no signs of the missing children. Dr. Maples believes the evidence, though elusive, is still there.
A lot can be done out here at this site. There's a lot of debris down here. Some of it looks like rocks. Some of it looks potentially like bone. Bone will stick to your tongue because it's dry, especially burned. So that's a good way of telling rocks from bones. But that's nothing.
So were the bodies burned? Or was Yurovsky's story merely a cover-up for the embarrassing escape of Anastasia and Alexei? Through the years, several men claimed to be Alexei, but the young heir suffered from hemophilia, a disease of the blood which prevents clotting. Even a minor injury could have killed him, so the chances of Alexei surviving the firing squad seemed nil. But Anastasia was another matter. Was it possible that the mischievous daughter, who loved to play tricks, had performed the greatest escape act of all?
If they had known during the Hamburg trials that the body was missing, I guarantee you that would have clinched it. Because she damn near won in Germany. She almost made it.
When she died, Anna Anderson's body was cremated. This ruled out the possibility of DNA comparisons with the Tsar's bones. Ever since Gleb Botkin championed her cause in the 1920s, Anna Anderson's supporters had sought proof of her authenticity. Botkin's daughter, Marina Schweitzer, continued the search even after Anna Anderson's death.
At the time that they identified the remains of the whole imperial family, of course, we wondered if we could do the same for the Grand Duchess.
It's a matter of loyalty, you know. There's somebody here to keep on with what ought to be done. It's a matter of family loyalty, of whatever you want to say, yeah.
In 1993, almost a decade after Anna Anderson's death, the Schweitzers found what could be the conclusive piece of evidence.
The question may arise as to how do we know this is Ms. Manahan's tissue, and I can assure you that the number that we have correlates to the number on the surgical pathology report, which also correlates to her history number, and I know full well that this indeed is the tissue of Anastasia Manahan, tissue received as a portion of small bowel from her.
Anna Anderson had undergone surgery at a Charlottesville hospital in 1979. A small portion of her intestine had been removed and routinely stored in the pathology lab. Dick and Marina Schweitzer hired Dr. Peter Gill, the same scientist who identified the Tsar's bones, to determine once and for all Anna Anderson's true identity.
Dr. Gill, I'm now going to seal this bag from the D block. This has the 4 tissue samples that you took and the control from that block.
Okay, thank you.
These bags have an adhesive on them that seal the bag, and the bag can only be re-entered one time.
Dr. Gill will compare DNA from the intestine to the DNA of the Duke of Edinburgh, already established to be identical to his cousins, the Tsar's children.
If the DNA tests were to prove that Anna Anderson were Anastasia, I suppose my reactions would be twofold. One of sorrow that she died without her identity, or with her identity being questioned, and I think that would be sad. I suppose the second one would be a bit of chagrin that the family would have that wonderful American expression, egg on its face, but you know, it would be a sad mistake, but it would be an honest mistake.
If we find out that 2 or 3 reputable tests for DNA demonstrate that she has not related to these bones, that she is not the same, then I will say, well, it looks like we made a mistake. I'll say that, and I won't mind saying that. It won't reflect negatively on me at all. I will then want to know who on earth she was, as anyone who knew her would want to know.
Since the 1920s, Anna Anderson's opponents claimed to know exactly who she was, the missing factory worker Franziska Shanskowska. And now this theory, too, can be put to the test. A maternal grandnephew of Franziska Shanskowska has been found in Germany. The nephew, Karl Mauscher, gives blood so that his DNA can be compared to Anna Anderson's. After months of work, the results are in.
Hello?
Hello? Is Mr. Schweitzer there, please?
This is Mrs. Schweitzer.
I'm phoning up with the results of our tests.
Right.
Now. Shall I give it to you straight?
Yes. Okay. The sample that we got from the tissue
did not match the DNA profile which we would expect to have found from the
Grand Duchess Anastasia. We then compared the tissue sample with a blood sample from Karl Mauscher, and we actually got a positive match.
Oh, that's not possible.
Karl Mauscher.
That is just unbelievable. But that's all right. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Doctor.
Yeah, okay.
So that does support the view that
Anna Anderson was Kanchelska.
Oh, that's not possible.
It's just impossible.
It's just impossible.
That is just out of this world. That's unbelievable.
Shown here are some of the differences that we've observed. So this upper sequence is that of the Duke of Edinburgh. Then we have Anna Anderson's sequence, and thirdly Karl Mauscher. And you can see that there are differences between the sequences of the Duke of Edinburgh and Anna Anderson. For instance, in this region, the sequence of the Duke of Edinburgh reads GGGT, whereas within Anna Anderson it reads GGAT. And in fact, this is the same as that of Karl Mauscher in this region, who also reads GGAT. and we can keep on looking at these other differences to demonstrate the point that Anna Anderson does not have the same sequence as the Duke of Edinburgh and is therefore not the missing princess. She is not Anastasia.
It's not possible.
That's
something happened.
Something happened. Something wrong.
How,
and Gina would never be taken in by a Polish peasant.
And what about Princess Ksenia?
And Princess Xenia. And what about Saxe-Altenburg?
That's right.
All those people, the Leuchtenbergs, they just wouldn't do it. They would never have been taken in by somebody of less than really aristocratic origins.
Mm-hmm.
Peter Kurth followed Anna Anderson's story for 20 years. Shortly after hearing the DNA results, he came down with pneumonia and had to be hospitalized.
It is impossible for me to accept that Anna Anderson was Franziska Szankowska. It will never happen, I promise you. This is because, as I've said, I knew her. And I'm speaking not as an expert, but as a witness, as someone who knew what she was like, knew what her presence was like, knew what her face was like, knew what her manner, her gestures, her every fiber was made of. She was an absolute lady right down the line. There was nothing about her that made you think of factories and fields. Nothing.
In addition to Dr. Gill's lab, DNA tests were also performed by the U.S. Armed Forces Institute of Pathology and at Penn State University. All three labs came up with the same DNA profile for Anna Anderson, indicating she could not have been Anastasia. The DNA test supports one conclusion. Anna Anderson was Franziska Szankowska.
It isn't about Anna Anderson, these statistics about what chances it would be that she was this, that, or the other thing. It's not about her at all. It's about science. Science, the tragedy of science and the dark side of science is that it does not take into account the authentic experience of real people. This was the big thing that was taken from her, was the right to insist on her own experience and her own memory. So that's all I'm doing here now, is insisting on my own experience.
You read a book, but I was leaving this dirt.
That's it, living it.
Dirt it was, and nothing else, Mr. Monahan. Not something comfortable reading a book.
No.
When you sit comfortable and eat nicely and read, I have been leaving this dirt. Dirt I was leaving.
If Anna Anderson wasn't Anastasia, what did happen to the real princess?
Anastasia and Alexei almost certainly died that night, in my opinion. I've known too many murderers. I've seen what murderers do. Kind-hearted executioners don't seem to be real in the world, only in myths and legends. I just don't see how anyone could have survived it, could have survived the beating, could have survived the shootings, could have survived the stabbing, bodies falling out of trucks after all of what happened to them in the Apatiev house. I don't believe it. Those two children died that night along with the rest of their family.
In Russia, the search for the two missing children continues. And until new evidence turns up, what really happened to Anastasia Romanov will remain a mystery.
Educators and home viewers can purchase this and many other NOVA programs for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-255-9424. Nova is a production of WGBH Boston. Funding for Nova is provided by Raytheon. Through technological innovation in air traffic control systems, Raytheon helps bring people safely together around the world. Raytheon. Expect great things. And by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. Major funding for Nova is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
This is PBS.
Next time on Nova, Destination Venus. No one has ever seen its surface until now, and the revelations are ripping the best theories to shreds. So forget about science fiction. This is the true Venus unveiled. Next time on Nova.
For more information about Nova, visit the PBS homepage on the World Wide Web at www.pbs.org. For transcripts of Nova programs, call 1-800-831-9000.